I was forced by my family to marry my sister's millionaire ex-fiancé in a coma. The unbelievable happened. My name is Elena Marwood, and I never imagined my life would take such a wild turn. In the beautiful cobblestone streets of Millionaire, a city where the air smells of roses and every sunset paints the sky in shades of gold, I was just an ordinary woman working at a small flower shop when my family dropped a bombshell that changed everything. My older sister Clara had been engaged to Theo Langston, a millionaire whose charm and wealth made him the talk of the town, until a mysterious illness left him in a coma. It was heartbreaking watching Clara fall apart as the man she loved slipped away from the world. But then came the twist I never saw coming. One evening, as the lanterns flickered outside our family's old stone house, my parents sat me down with grim faces. They told me Theo's family had a fortune tied up in traditions, rules that demanded he marry before his 30th birthday, coma or not, or they'd lose everything. Clara couldn't do it. She was too broken, they said. So they turned to me, their quiet, unassuming daughter, and said I had to take her place. I felt my stomach drop, my hands trembling as I tried to process it. I wanted to scream, to run out into Luminera's misty streets and disappear. Marry a man I barely knew, a man who couldn't even speak to me? It felt like a cruel joke. But my parents' eyes were pleading, and they spoke of duty, of saving Clara's future, and ours. Theo's family was offering a fortune to whoever stepped into this bizarre arrangement, and they made it clear they wouldn't take no for an answer. I was trapped, caught between my own dreams and the weight of their expectations. The next few days were a blur of silk dresses and whispered plans. I met Theo's mother, a stern woman named Beatrick, who looked at me like I was a piece of furniture being appraised. She didn't care that I had a life, that I loved arranging flowers and sketching by the river. To her, I was a solution to a problem. A key to keeping their empire intact. I hated how small I felt in her presence. But there was no turning back. My family had already accepted the deal. The wedding was surreal, held in a grand hall overlooking Luminera's shimmering lake. I stood there in a gown that wasn't mine, staring at Theo lying in a polished bed they'd wheeled in for the ceremony. He was handsome even in his stillness, dark hair falling over his pale forehead, a quiet strength in his features. The priest's words echoed in my ears as I said, "I do," my voice shaking. I wasn't marrying a man, I was marrying a shadow. A promise I didn't understand. Afterward, I moved into Theo's sprawling estate on the edge of the city, a place of marble floors and endless gardens. The staff treated me like a ghost, whispering behind my back as I wandered the halls. I'd sit by Theo's bedside, sometimes reading to him from books I found in his library, adventure tales and poetry, anything to fill the silence. I didn't know if he could hear me, but it made me feel less alone in this strange new life I'd been forced into. Clara visited once, her eyes red from crying. She hugged me, whispering apologies I didn't want to hear. I didn't blame her. This wasn't her fault. But it stung to see how free she still was while I carried this burden. I'd look out at Luminera's twinkling lights at night and wonder if I'd ever find my own happiness in this gilded cage, or if I'd always be the girl who said yes when she wanted to say no. But something unexpected was stirring inside me. As the days passed, I started noticing little things, how the sunlight hit Theo's face in the morning, how his hand twitched sometimes when I spoke. I couldn't explain it, but a tiny spark of curiosity flickered in my chest. Maybe this wasn't just a duty. Maybe, somehow, there was more to this story waiting to unfold. Living in Theo's estate started to feel less like a prison and more like a puzzle I couldn't stop trying to solve. The days stretched out before me, filled with the soft rustle of leaves in the gardens and the distant hum of Luminera beyond the gates. I'd wake up early, the morning light spilling through the tall windows, and find myself drawn to Theo's room. It wasn't just duty anymore. Something about him pulled me in, like a melody I couldn't quite place but wanted to hear again. I started talking to him more, not just reading books, but sharing pieces of my day. I'd tell him about the roses I trimmed in the greenhouse, or the way the baker in town had waved at me through the window. His face never changed, but I swear there were moments when his fingers seemed to curl slightly, as if reaching for something. The nurses said it was nothing, just reflexes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was listening, locked somewhere deep inside himself. The estate wasn't all silence and stillness, though. Theo's younger brother, Miles, lived there too, and he was the opposite of the quiet I'd grown used to. He'd breeze into rooms with a grin, his sandy hair a mess, asking me questions about my old life at the flower shop. At first, I kept my distance. After all, I was the stranger who'd married into his family. But he had a warmth that chipped away at my walls. He'd tease me about my terrible attempts at cooking, and soon I found myself laughing more than I had in weeks. One afternoon, Miles dragged me out to the orchard behind the house, insisting I needed fresh air. The trees were heavy with apples, their scent sweet and crisp, and we spent hours picking them, my hands stained with juice. He told me stories about Theo, how he'd once climbed the tallest tree just to impress a girl, how he'd always dreamed of sailing across the world. It was the first time I saw Theo as more than a figure in a bed. He'd been alive, full of dreams. And I wanted to know more. Back inside, I started digging through Theo's things, not to snoop, but to understand him. I found journals in his study, pages filled with sketches of boats and scribbled plans for adventures. His handwriting was messy but bold, and I traced the lines with my fingers, imagining the man who'd written them. It hit me then, I wasn't just tied to a coma patient. I was tied to a life that had been paused, waiting for someone to press play. The more I learned, the more I felt a strange pull to help him. I began asking the nurses questions about his condition, about what might wake him. They were kind but firm, saying it was up to time and chance. Still, I couldn't let it go. I'd sit by his bed at night, the room glowing with candlelight, and whisper promises I wasn't sure I could keep. "I'll figure this out, Theo," I'd say, my voice soft against the quiet. "We'll figure it out together." Miles noticed the change in me. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace with mugs of tea, he leaned over and said, "You're not just doing this for them anymore, are you?" I didn't answer right away. But he was right. This wasn't about my family or Theo's fortune. It was about the man I was starting to care for, even if he couldn't care back. Yet. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. And he nodded, like he'd known it all along. By the time the stars lit up Luminaire's sky that night, I realized something had shifted inside me. I wasn't the scared girl who'd walked down that aisle anymore. I was Elena, the woman who'd stumbled into a mystery and decided to stay. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And as I looked out at the city's twinkling lights, I felt a quiet hope blooming like the first petals of spring after a long winter. The days in Theo's estate began to feel like a rhythm I was learning to dance to. I'd start my mornings with a walk through Luminaire's winding streets, the city waking up around me, vendors calling out, the clatter of horse-drawn carts, the scent of fresh bread in the air. I'd bring back little treasures for Theo's room, a sprig of lavender, a smooth stone from the riverbank. It was my way of bringing the world to him, even if he couldn't see it yet. Back at the house, I found myself spending more time with Miles, who'd become my unexpected ally. He'd pull me into projects, repainting a gazebo, planting herbs in the garden, and I started to feel like I belonged. One day, he handed me a dusty old guitar he'd found in the attic, saying Theo used to play it. I didn't know a single chord, but I'd strum it by Theo's bedside anyway, laughing at how awful I sounded. If he could hear me, I thought, he'd probably beg me to stop. But it wasn't all light and laughter. Some nights, doubt crept in like fog rolling off Luminaire's lake. I'd sit by Theo, watching his chest rise and fall, and wonder if I was fooling myself. What if he never woke up? What if I was pouring my heart into a story with no ending? I'd push those thoughts away, focusing on the little signs, the way his breathing seemed to steady when I talked, the faint warmth of his hand when I held it. One afternoon, I stumbled across something that changed everything. In Theo's study, tucked inside a book of poetry, was a letter he'd written to Clara before the coma. It wasn't a love note. It was an apology. He'd been planning to call off the engagement, saying he wasn't ready to settle down. My heart raced as I read it. He'd wanted freedom, not a wedding. Suddenly, I saw my marriage in a new light, not as a duty he'd have hated, but as a chance to give him something better. I started talking to him about that letter, my voice steady but soft. "You wanted to sail, didn't you? To see the world?" I'd ask, imagining him nodding somewhere in his silent mind. I told him about Luminara's harbor, the boats bobbing on the water, and promised I'd take him there one day. It felt silly at first, but it gave me purpose, like I was building a bridge between the man he'd been and the life we might still have. Miles caught me mid-conversation one day and raised an eyebrow. "You're really in this, aren't you?" he said, half teasing, half impressed. I nodded, feeling a flush creep up my cheeks. He didn't push, just handed me a cup of coffee and sat with me by Theo's bed. We started brainstorming together, ways to stimulate Theo, to bring him back. Music, stories, even the smell of the sea. It was a long shot, but it felt like we were a team. The nurses began to notice my efforts too. One of them, a kind woman named Lila, pulled me aside and said, "You're different from the others who've come through here. You care." She told me about a doctor in the city who specialized in cases like Theo's, someone who might have answers. My pulse quickened. It was the first real lead I'd had. I thanked her, my mind already racing with plans to track him down. That night, as Luminara glowed under a blanket of stars, I sat by Theo and felt a surge of determination. I wasn't just the girl forced into a marriage anymore. I was the one fighting for something bigger. I leaned close, my voice barely a whisper, and said, "We're going to get you out of this, Theo. You and me." And for the first time, I believed it. The hope in my chest as bright as the city lights outside. The next morning, I woke up with a fire in my chest I hadn't felt before. Luminara's golden light streamed through my window, and I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to find that Dr. Lila had mentioned. I grabbed my coat, scribbled a note for Miles, and headed into the city, my heart pounding with every step. The streets were alive with the chatter of merchants and the clink of coins, but all I could think about was getting answers for Theo. I found Dr. Harrow's office tucked between a bookstore and a cafe, its sign weathered but welcoming. He was an older man with sharp eyes and a gentle voice. And when I explained Theo's case, he didn't brush me off like I'd feared. He listened, nodding as I described the twitches, the way Theo seemed to respond to me. "It's not impossible," he said, adjusting his glasses. "The mind's a mystery. Sometimes it just needs the right push." He gave me a list of things to try: sounds, scents, even touch. I left feeling lighter than I had in months. Back at the estate, I turned Theo's room into a little experiment. I brought in a phonograph from the parlor, playing soft melodies he might have loved, sea shanties and waltzes that filled the air. I opened the windows, letting the salty breeze from Luminara's harbor drift in, hoping it'd spark something in him. I'd hold his hand, tracing circles on his palm, talking about the boats we'd sail together. Miles would peek in, smirking, but he joined me sometimes, humming along like we were coaxing Theo back to life. It wasn't instant magic. Days passed with no big change. But I started noticing more. His eyelids fluttered once when I laughed at a clumsy dance I tried to show him. Another time, his lips parted slightly as I described the apple tarts we'd bake when he woke up. The nurses raised their eyebrows, scribbling notes. And even Beatrick, Theo's cold mother, stopped by one day. She didn't say much, just watched me with a look I couldn't read. But it felt like a crack in her armor. Miles and I kept pushing forward, turning it into a routine. We'd sit by Theo, swapping stories about Luminara, how the festival lights looked like stars fallen to earth, how the river glowed at dusk. I'd weave in bits from Theo's journals, painting pictures of the adventures he'd planned. "You'll see it all," I'd tell him, my voice steady with belief. And slowly, I started to feel like he was closer, like the distance between us was shrinking. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the room orange, something incredible happened. I was midway through a story about a storm I'd seen over the lake when Theo's fingers tightened around mine, just for a second, but it was real. I froze, my breath catching, and called for Miles. He rushed in, wide-eyed, and we waited, staring at Theo's still face. It didn't happen again that night. But it was enough. A sign that he was fighting to come back. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat by the window, looking out at Luminaire's shimmering skyline, replaying that moment in my mind. It wasn't just hope anymore. It was proof. Theo was in there, and I was reaching him, piece by piece. I felt a smile spread across my face, warm and unstoppable, as I realized how much I'd changed. I wasn't just surviving this life. I was shaping it, for both of us. By the time the moon rose, I made a quiet vow to myself. I'd keep going, no matter how long it took. Dr. Harrow's words echoed in my head. The mind's a mystery. And I was determined to solve it. To bring Theo back, to the world, and to me. Luminaire's beauty felt like a promise that night, whispering that we were on the right path. Together. After that night, when Theo's hand gripped mine, everything felt different, like the air in Luminaire carried a new kind of electricity. I woke up each day with a purpose that hummed through me, pushing me out of bed and back to his side. The estate didn't feel so vast and empty anymore. It was a space we were filling together, even if he couldn't speak yet. I'd greet him every morning with a smile, saying, "Good morning, Theo. We've got work to do," like he was my partner in this quiet mission. I leaned harder into Dr. Harrow's advice, turning Theo's room into a world of senses. I'd bring in fresh flowers from the garden, lilacs and daisies, letting their scent drift around us as I told him about the blooms I'd tended. I'd play recordings of the harbor, the waves lapping against the docks, imagining it was the sea he dreamed of sailing. Sometimes I'd brush his hair back, my fingers lingering, and talk about the little things, the way the sunlight danced on the lake, the taste of honey on warm bread. Miles was right there with me, his energy keeping me steady. He'd started calling us Team Theo, grinning as he hauled in old trinkets from the attic, things Theo might recognize one day. He found a worn leather jacket Theo used to wear, and we draped it over the chair by his bed. "Smell that," Miles said, laughing. "Pure adventure." I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. Miles had a way of making even the heaviest moments feel light, and I was grateful for it. The signs kept coming, small but steady. Theo's head turned slightly one afternoon when I sang a clumsy tune, his breath hitching like he was trying to join in. Another time, his eyes fluttered open for a heartbeat before closing again, leaving me staring in shock. The nurses started hovering more, their clipboards busy with notes. Even Lila pulled me aside to say, "You're doing something right, Elena." It wasn't a miracle yet, but it was close enough to keep me going. I began dreaming about what life might be like if Theo woke up. I'd picture us walking through Luminaire, hand in hand, the city's charm wrapping around us like a warm blanket. I'd show him the flower shop where I'd worked, the river where I'd sketched, and we'd laugh about how we'd started, two strangers tied together by fate. It wasn't just a fantasy, it felt like a future I could reach out and touch if I just kept pushing. One rainy afternoon, as the patter of drops filled the room, I decided to read him something special. I'd found a poem in his journals, not one he'd written, but one he'd copied out, about the sea calling to a wanderer. My voice trembled as I read the words, weaving between us. And when I finished, I looked up to see his fingers twitch again. I held my breath, waiting. And then, his eyes opened. Not a flutter this time, but a real, slow blink. His gaze cloudy but alive. I nearly dropped the book, my hands shaking as I leaned closer. "Theo," I whispered, afraid to hope too hard. He didn't speak, didn't move much, but his eyes stayed on me, like he was seeing me for the first time. I called for Miles, my voice cracking, and he burst in, stopping dead when he saw. We stood there, staring, as Theo's chest rose and fell, his presence suddenly real in a way it hadn't been before. It wasn't a full awakening. Not yet. But it was a beginning. That night, Luminaire's rain washed the world clean. And I sat by Theo's bed, my heart full to bursting. I didn't know how long it'd take for him to come back completely. But I knew one thing, we'd crossed a line together. He wasn't just a man in a coma anymore. He was Theo. My Theo. and I'd be there every step of the way. The city outside glowed through the storm, a beacon of what was still to come. The moment Theo's eyes opened, even just for that fleeting second, changed everything inside me. I woke up the next day feeling like Luminera itself was cheering me on. The birds sang louder. The breeze felt softer. And every flower in the garden seemed to bloom brighter. I rushed to his room, my heart racing, and found him still, but different. His face had a hint of color now, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. And I knew we were on the edge of something incredible. The nurses were buzzing around him more than ever, adjusting machines and murmuring to each other in hushed tones. Dr. Harrow came by that afternoon, his calm presence steadying me as he checked Theo's vitals. "He's responding," he said, a small smile breaking through his usual seriousness. "Keep doing what you're doing. It's working." I nodded, barely able to speak. And when he left, I sat by Theo and whispered, "We're getting there. You and me. Just hold on." I threw myself into it harder than ever. I'd talk to him for hours, my voice weaving through the room, stories about Luminera's festivals, silly tales from my flower shop days, anything to keep him tethered to the world. I'd play the phonograph until the needle wore thin, filling the air with music I hoped he'd loved. Sometimes, I'd just sit quietly, holding his hand, feeling the faint pulse beneath his skin and willing it to grow stronger. Miles was my rock through it all. He'd bring me tea when my voice got hoarse, crack jokes to keep me from worrying too much. One day, he showed up with a tiny model boat he'd carved, setting it on Theo's nightstand. "For when he's ready to sail," he said with a wink. We laughed, but it wasn't just a joke. It was a promise, a piece of the future we were building. I started to see Miles not just as Theo's brother but as my friend, someone who believed in this as much as I did. Theo's progress came in waves. One morning, his hand squeezed mine again, stronger this time, deliberate, and I nearly cried right there. Another day, he murmured something, a sound too soft to catch, but it lit me up like fireworks over Luminera's lake. The nurses said his brain was waking up, bit by bit. And every tiny step felt like a victory. I'd look into his eyes when they opened, briefly, hazily, and see a spark growing. A man fighting his way back to me. I started planning for when he'd be fully awake. I'd take him outside first, I decided, let him feel the sun on his face, breathe the air off the harbor. We'd walk through Luminera together, slow and steady, and I'd show him the life I'd fallen into while he slept. I'd catch myself smiling at the thought, imagining his voice, his laugh, things I didn't even know yet but couldn't wait to discover. This wasn't just about waking him up anymore. It was about starting something new. Even Beatrice softened a little. She'd linger in the doorway sometimes, watching me with Theo, her stern face thawing. Once, she brought a bouquet of roses from her own garden and set them by his bed without a word. It wasn't an apology, but it was a gesture, and I took it. The whole estate felt lighter, like the weight of the past was lifting. And I realized how much I'd grown. I wasn't the scared girl who'd arrived here. I was someone stronger. Someone who'd found her place. By the time the week ended, Theo's eyes stayed open longer, locking onto mine with a clarity that stole my breath. He didn't speak yet. But he saw me. I could feel it. And that was enough. I sat there as Luminera's sunset painted the room gold, my hand in his, and felt a peace settle over me. We were so close now, teetering on the edge of a life I'd never dared to dream of. And I knew deep down that we'd make it, together. The days after Theo's eyes started staying open felt like a dream. I never wanted to wake from Luminera's. Spring was in full bloom, and I'd bring that magic into his room, fresh petals scattered on the windowsill, the sound of birds drifting in with the breeze. He was still quiet, his movement slow, but every time his gaze found mine, it was sharper, warmer, like he was piecing me together in his mind. I talked to him about everything, my voice steady and bright, knowing he was really listening now. One morning, it finally happened. I was telling him about the festival lights I'd seen as a girl, how they'd floated on the river like wishes, when his lips moved. Elena, he said, his voice rough and faint, but clear as day. My heart stopped, then raced. I leaned closer, tears blurring my vision. I'm here, I whispered, squeezing his hand. He smiled, a small, tired curve of his mouth, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Theo was back. Truly back. And I felt like I could fly. The next weeks were a whirlwind of recovery. Dr. Harrow came often, guiding Theo through simple exercises while I stayed by his side, cheering every step. He'd sit up now, his dark hair messy in the best way, and ask me questions, about Luminera, about the estate, about me. I told him everything, from my flower shop days to the moment I'd walked down that aisle, and he listened with a quiet wonder, like he was discovering the world all over again. We laughed together, soft and easy, and I knew this was the start of something real. Miles was over the moon, practically bouncing around the house. He dragged Theo into gentle debate about boats or teased me about my terrible guitar skills. And the three of us became a little family of our own. One sunny afternoon, I kept my promise. I took Theo outside, his arm around my shoulders, and we sat by the garden, breathing in the sweet air. He looked at me, his eyes bright, and said, "You saved me." I shook my head, smiling. We saved each other. Luminera became our playground after that. Theo grew stronger every day, and we'd wander the city together, past the harbor, through the markets, under the arching trees. He'd hold my hand, his grip firm now, and tell me about the dreams he'd had while he slept. Dreams of the sea, yes, but also of a voice calling him back. "It was you," he said one evening as the sunset turned the lake gold, and my heart swelled so big I thought it might burst. This was the happy ending I'd fought for, and it was better than I'd imagined. Looking back, I couldn't believe how far we'd come, from a forced vow to a love I'd chosen. Theo and I built a life in that estate, filling it with music, flowers, and plans for the future. We'd sit by the fire some nights, sketching boat designs or just talking, and I'd catch him watching me with a grin that said it all. Luminera had given us a second chance, and we were making the most of it. Together. If you loved hearing this story unfold, don't forget to hit that like button, it means the world to me. Subscribe if you haven't already, so you won't miss more tales like this one, where hope turns into something real. Share your thoughts in the comments, I'd love to know what you think of Elena and Theo's journey. What's your favorite part of Luminera? Let's chat about it. Stick around for the next video, where we'll dive into another adventure, maybe even one with a boat on the horizon. Hit that bell icon so you're the first to know when it drops. Thanks for being here with me through this incredible ride. Here's to more happy endings, right from the heart of Luminera. See you soon. A year later. Luminera feels like home in a way I never thought possible. Theo and I walk the cobblestone streets, hand in hand, the city's glow wrapping around us like an old friend. He's stronger now, his laugh echoing through the markets as we stop for honey-drizzled pastries, and I can't help but marvel at how far we've come. The estate's gardens bloom brighter with us tending them together, a little piece of paradise we've carved out. We took that boat trip he'd always dreamed of, sailing across the harbor under a sky full of stars. The wind tugged at my hair as Theo steered, his grin wide and alive, and I knew this was the freedom he'd written about in those journals. I'd catch him looking at me sometimes, his eyes soft, and he'd say, "You're my anchor, Elena." Every time, my heart skips, because he's mine too. Miles still drops by, always with a new story or a terrible joke, and we've become a trio of dreamers. We're planning a festival float next spring, something with flowers and lights, a nod to how this all began. Theo sketches the designs while I arrange the blooms, and Miles just laughs, saying we're unstoppable. It's a simple life, but it's ours, built from whispers in a quiet room. The townsfolk know our tale now, calling it Luminera's miracle. I smile when they do, because it's not just a story, it's us. Messy, and real, and beautiful. We sit by the lake some evenings, watching the water ripple, and I feel a peace that's hard to describe. This is what I fought for. What I stayed for. And it's more than I ever hoped. If this journey's touched you, Hit that like button, it keeps me going. Subscribe for more stories like ours, where love finds a way against all odds. Drop a comment. Tell me what you'd sail toward in Luminera, I'd love to hear from you. Don't miss what's next, tap that bell so you're ready when the next adventure drops. Maybe it'll be about a festival, or a new dreamer in this city of light. Thanks for sticking with me through every step of this wild ride. It's been a joy to share. You're part of this now. Part of Luminera's magic. Share this with someone who needs a little hope today, it's a story worth spreading. Let's keep the light alive. Together. One tale at a time. See you soon, friends. Here's to more beginnings, more boats on the horizon, and more nights under these stars. Until then, keep dreaming big.